Yo, everybody. Welcome to Off Panel, a weekly interview podcast about all things comics, brought to you by Sketch.com. I'm your host, David Harper, and this week's guest is the artist of X-Men Fantastic Four and the upcoming Adventureman. It's Terry Dodson. Thanks for coming on, Terry.
Hey, thanks, David. Thanks for having me on.
So I want to start with, how are things in Oregon? Is it weird down there? You know, we're recording on March 13th. There was just a national emergency declared. Is it getting weird? Can you get toilet paper? How's things?
You know, that's hilarious. We were talking with a friend of ours from Spain on Tuesday. Today's Friday, and he's like, "You might want to start looking at toilet paper at your store." So Wednesday morning, I go to the store just to go get some stuff, and I go to the toilet paper aisle, and all gone. And
wow.
I'd shopped like on Monday, and then went there on Wednesday. It was all gone, and I was like, "Wow." So that Wednesday was kind of, I think they announced that it was a pandemic that day. I think. So it was like all the everything was starting to get canceled by that point. So it was weird. It's like that was Wednesday, Thursday, today's Friday. It's interesting. Today was a national emergency declared. So it's interesting seeing this over the last 2 weeks, though, because we've been talking about meeting up at Emerald City, which was started yesterday, and that weekend, which was 2 weeks ago, there was the announcements of the stuff in Seattle, and then it just skyrocketed, since that point. So, I don't know. I mean, I'm in a more rural part of the state, so it's tough to get a judge of overall kind of have people too much. But just based on toilet paper, people are preparing here. So, it's as someone who works at home and kind of is removed from a lot of the flus and overall colds and sicknesses and stuff. It's not that big a change for me, but I'm glad that things like that are happening, because you can see that the less chance of spreading stuff if you're not amongst other people.
Yeah. Well, and it is affecting, it's interesting how this type of stuff affects people in comics in all kinds of ways that you don't really expect. I mean, you look at, like you said, we were supposed to be at Emerald City Comic-Con like yesterday, or actually this morning is when we would have done it, or this very interview, if we were actually at Emerald City. And I know that you described it as your con. It is a convention that's really important to you. I see you there every year. You always have like a nice table set up. It seems like a big deal for you. It does seem like there is an impact in the sense that, like, either, the community opportunities or the networking opportunities, or like for a lot of creators, like I've read some people saying things like, this is several months of revenue for me that's being like taken away because of this, which is just crazy. I mean, the good news is, I don't know if you saw, but they were officially put a date up for it. I think it's August 21st to 23rd is when the con is going to be. But I mean, so I'm curious though, why is Emerald City your con? You were in Portland. They had Rose City. Was it just, I don't know, the biggest one in the area?
I mean, Emerald City, I started going late relatively. I mean, 2010, 2011. So this would have been like my 10th in a row. But from that first time that I went, it felt like that very first time, it felt like San Diego used to be. I think, I don't know what the numbers were for that show, but I'd guess 20 to 25,000. It was a 2 or 3 day show. It was busy the whole time. There were a lot of great professionals there. I could drive to the show, everything else I go to, I fly to. And so to be able to go to a show that felt like San Diego without all the hassle and I could drive to was huge. And Seattle's a great city to hang out in for 4 or 5 days.
Yeah.
And having the show be right in the middle of the city center, where I could, just park the vehicle for 4 days and just enjoy the city and walk away from the show and just let it go. Whereas like a San Diego, which I still go to, the hotel's close, but it's really hard to escape.
Mm-hmm.
The show almost feels like it goes for 10 blocks in every direction, which I think it actually might. Whereas Seattle still feels like, even last year where it's gotten as big as it can get, really, it still feels like something I can escape from within a block of walking away from the convention center.
Yeah, yeah, that is one of my favorite things about it. Seattle, or downtown Seattle, is such a walkable area. You can just like walk over. There's cool bars and restaurants you can go eat at. It just seems like it's it's all a part. Emerald City like is a huge part of downtown Seattle during that part, but it's also like still a thriving area without it, and it makes it like I don't know. It makes it very cool. One of my favorite memories from Emerald City is I was going. There's this place called Biscuit Bitch down on like over by Pike's Place Market, and they make biscuits and gravy. And I was standing in line behind this guy who was wearing like a head to toe plate metal armor.
Right.
And first off, I was like, how the hell are you going to eat this food? And second off, I was like, you got to be really hot. And then he like showed me like he had all this ventilation built into it. And he was talking about how he like worked with his like blacksmith from Eastern Europe. And I was just like, this is insane. But I don't know. I just love how it integrates into the community. It feels like it's all one and the same, even though there's a separation there.
Yeah, most of the shows I go to are it's San Diego or it's New York or going to Europe or something where it's fun to go because it's such a different place. But there's Seattle, the Pacific Northwest, and I'm a native, Oregonian. So that show just feels so locally, regionally normal to me as far as the people I talk to there.
Yeah,
it's exploded where it's become really international. So there's this mix of people from Singapore and from France and from Florida, New York, and Seattle, but then Vancouver and Portland. It still has that regional feel as far as the majority of fans there are within 3 to 4 hours of driving.
Yeah.
So it's just a different feel, different clientele compared to the other shows. Though again, it's become so international now. It feels more like the rest of the shows in a way, but I still enjoy that Pacific Northwestness of it.
Yeah, yeah. It kind of feels like I'm coming down from Alaska. I feel like I'm kind of part of the Pacific Northwest, just like ultra Pacific and ultra Northwest.
Right.
But going there, it kind of feels like Cheers to me. It's like you go in there and it's just kind of like, I don't know, there's like a nice familiar feel to it. And I've talked to creators who say that people stop by their table every year and they're just like, what do you have that's new? I want to buy whatever you got. I just want to support you. I think that's really cool. It's like it really feels like a community, and like in a way that, as much as I like places like New York and other cons like that those ones maybe don't quite as much. I don't know.
Right. I just think it feels local.
Yeah.
Again, I compare that to going to San Diego so I started going to San Diego like 91 or 92. And, that's 18 years later, I started going to Seattle. And so all of a sudden, all these years of going to New York and San Diego and wherever else to have a place that feels like a home is pretty cool.
Yeah.
And again, I like the other shows as well, but this one just feels
it's
like
your baby. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about, because one of the things I think is really interesting when I look through your career and look through all the other stuff you've done, you have, I don't know, it's really fascinating. You look at your career, and I read this quote from you in an interview where you said between June 2012 and May 2015, you produced a minimum of 480 pages of pencils, 120 pages of color, and 90 colored covers, plus the odd assortment of illustration and design jobs. You've done things like the art for like a toy line. You've just done like an unbelievable amount of stuff. You actually like designed statues and things like that.
Right.
And
right.
It seems like, and also cons. I mean, like, I know I have one of your con sketchbooks. It seems like your sketchbooks for every year are like kind of one of those items that people really want to get. I'm curious, like, how much of your workload is interiors? Because like right now you're doing 2 books on interiors, which is like overdosing on interiors. And then also how much that has fluctuated over time, because it seems like you do a lot outside of interiors as well.
Yeah. Well, the thing with my current workload that's very deceptive is I've actually been working on Adventureman since late 2016.
Yeah.
And so, I actually basically finished drawing 100. It's a first year of it is 146 pages, and that's already in the can.
Mm-hmm.
I'm coloring it now. So that's deceptive that it's coming out after the X-Men FF book, but that's in the can. So I'm actually coloring that now. Drawing the X-Men FF interiors. So I've not actually had, I think the longest break I've had on interiors is maybe a month or so.
Hmm.
Though it's really a weird thought. The break between when X-Men FF came out in February and my last interiors came out, I think was 2017. I think it was 3 years.
Yeah.
And maybe from Marvel, like since the Princess Leia book, which was I think 2015, 2016. So for like a mainstream superhero or super mainstream comic book, it's like 4 or 5 years. People assumed I was just like, I don't know, doing nothing. But I actually did 2 volumes of Red One, which was a European hardcover collection through Glénat, France, and then through Image here. And then, like I said, I've been working on Adventureman for like 3.5 years now.
Hmm.
So this whole time I've been doing pages.
Yeah.
Just no one's seen them. So it's really strange. I figured out actually that between February and July, there are going to be 236 pages coming out from me.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that's 7 months. that's like, 2 years worth of work, I think, maybe, or something. All shipping at that time. But what keeps me interested in being an artist is a variety of stuff. I love drawing pages because it's such a challenge. I love telling a story and designing the worlds and stuff. But doing covers or doing prints or designing characters or toys or statues, it's another creative challenge. And I really like being pushed.
Mm-hmm.
I like growing as an artist and finding new challenges and sharpening up my skills. I'm never satisfied with what I do, and so I'm always looking for that next challenge. And I knew all a long time I wasn't just going to draw like monthly books for a company. I knew that there were all these other things I wanted to play with, and fortunately I managed to kind of make my career work that way because I knew that for my longevity and my creativity and my mental well-being, it was best that I do a variety of things just to kind of keep. And that was me. I started putting my own sketchbooks together for conventions almost 20 years ago now. I started doing that in 2001.
Mm-hmm.
Because I had sketchbooks full of stuff that weren't Marvel and DC characters. They were creator-owned things I had, or just sketching for fun. And just showed me being someone besides the guy that drew Spider-Man or the guy that drew Wonder Woman. Showed what I do when I'm creating, when I'm not creating for somebody else, but when I'm creating for myself. And it's a good way to, as it turned out, it's a good way to just promote myself as Terry Dodson, the artist, as opposed to Terry Dodson, the guy that does this other stuff.
Yeah. Well, and also I think it's important too because, I mean, you go to cons all the time. You've seen the shift. It's Artist Alley has went from being a place where you buy some books and you get some commissions and things like that to full out merchandising.
Yeah.
And having an item like that where, I don't know, it reminds me of in Alaska we have this thing called the For Rendezvous, which is like this big winter festival that involves like sled dog racing, all this different stuff. And they used to create these buttons, these wooden buttons every single year, and there'd be a different design. And everyone in Alaska seemingly went out of their way to collect one of those every year, regardless of what it looked like, because it was something that they were a part of. And I feel like with your sketchbook, especially when we're talking about like the community feel of something like Emerald City, or really just the community feel of fans of somebody like you, people want to have those items because it's like you can see that progression. You're like part of it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's people with like bookcases where it's like, I have my Terry Dodson shelf of sketchbooks.
Right. Oh yeah. Yeah. And there was a point maybe 10 years ago that was pretty neat. And now it's become where everybody does them, and there's so many good ones.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be super selective now about that, which is kind of too bad, but that's just the reality. When something works, you make 10 of them or 100 of them. And that you kind of see that with the comic market today, where there used to be 100 comics a month, and now they're like 500 to 1,000 because people are making money. And so everybody's kind of going, oh, it's a great idea. And it allows us as fans to be able to have something of that artist. A lot of times it's hard to buy a cover or get a sketch or whatever, but by getting that sketchbook, for $10, $20, whatever that is, you can even get an autograph or a sketch in it as well. And it allows you to have a piece of that. And as a fan of so many artists myself, I do the same thing. I have bookshelves just full of those things. What you described is what I have.
Yeah.
Or at least I used to. Now it's just piles because there's so much good stuff. It's like, man, we live in a time of such amazing access to create and distribute books and stuff for ourselves and prints and whatever, that everything's possible. And it's a time of riches, I guess.
For sure. I did want to note how, like, there was you mentioned maybe the perception that could form that you weren't really doing interiors and stuff when you were actually like, oh, I'm actually doing Adventureman. You just don't see it. I think that's a really fascinating thing because, one thing I read from you is in an interview is you kind of have like a pragmatic approach where you don't want to have holes in your schedule, so you make sure you fill them. And so you're kind of always seemingly doing things, but I don't know. I think it's really interesting in comics how artists can get this reputation of being slow or not being productive, despite the fact that they're actually working, and like people just don't know it. They just don't see it because maybe the book hasn't been announced or any number of other things. I mean, you look at look at Chris Samnee. Chris Samnee is a great example. Chris Samnee didn't do anything after he left Captain America for a year besides like some covers. And everyone's like, I remember people asked me like, what do you think Chris Samnee is doing? Like, is he going to DC? What is he doing? And then all of a sudden he has 2 books. He's drawing and one he's co-writing simultaneously, and one at Skybound, one at Oni. And it's fascinating. I always think it's really interesting how there's so much onus put on artists for like having these gaps, but really like we don't know any better. Like it's just like there's a perception versus reality gap there that's very odd.
Yeah, and the thing that's helped me, I think, enabled me to feel more confident about doing what I'm doing and taking that big gap is with social media. You can every day post up something.
Work in progress.
And then me doing, I'd be surprised if I didn't average a cover a week for the last 4 years.
Yes.
If you add it all up, I'm pretty sure it'll be in that ballpark. It'll be really close. And, so that means those are basically shipping almost every week. So I knew that, because I knew at the end of this tunnel of work that I need to promote myself and sell this product that I've been working on all this time. And I could just really focus and get it done a little bit faster if I turned on all the work assignments and just did it. Or it might take a little bit longer, but to keep my name out there monthly or even weekly, I know it's a huge factor in the viability of the book when I publish it. The people know who I am because I'm the guy that they haven't forgotten because I've been there every week. So, and it's a blast too. It's good for promotion, but then for just as an artist, what a blast to work on the cover assignments I've had, and to experiment as much as I can with that stuff. And but I do think there's so much competition. Not even in comic books, there's so much competition. But then you take in TV and video games, movies, anything on the internet, YouTube, whatever. You're competing against people's eyes every second of the day.
Yeah.
So to take a couple of years to work on a project, if at least we feel like that if we're not out there in some manner that people will forget. So I'm really thankful that I had the opportunity to work on so many covers, that so many people wanted me to do those, because it was a blast for me, and it was helpful for them, for the companies, and then it really just helped promote. So
yeah. I mean, honestly, I think I talked to Declan Shalvey about this last time he was on, and I actually feel like covers in some ways are one of the best ways an artist can kind of keep that public face, because you're always producing, you're always on the front of these books. Honestly, like sometimes it's a lot easier to just promote a cover than it is interiors, because you just post that one picture and then all of a sudden, like look at, a good example, like Chris Anka is doing the covers for Runaways, and every single one of them is fantastic, but he posts this one this week that was Runaways number 34, and it has Molly Hayes and it has Wolverine on it, and they're going to go to Krakoa, maybe. And it's this amazing image he did, and like it gets shared a ton. And,
right.
If you shared like 4 pages, if he shared 4 pages from like, a comic that he was doing himself or something like that, I doubt it would get the same reach. But that cover is like, I don't know, it's like that episode of Seinfeld where George was trying to remind the woman that he existed by doing the by Menon thing.
Right.
Yeah,
Right.
I feel like that's the thing that that covers do for people. It's just like a constant reminder of Terry Dodson.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I run into that problem right now where I'm switching over to promoting the X-Men book and the Adventureman book, and I've done the covers for the books as well, and they're as good or better than any of the other covers I did for just my cover work. But it's like I got to promote the inside of the book, and I'm going now. What am I putting up? Because I know these pages are really good, but people are used to seeing. I'm used to seeing just this singular image. So it's been interesting picking and choosing what I'm showing people. I'm still kind of learning that because I haven't promoted a comic book for 3 or 4 years. So that has been a real challenge, figuring out ways to get that eyes to look at that highly detailed page,
Right.
Because it's hard for them to stop and want to see it when they can. When right next to it is this singular image that sums up the whole story really quickly.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is definitely the pros of doing the covers. That's or doing cover type work, and that explains the image the image artists appeal back in the 90s.
Yeah, yeah. Well, this is like the worst thing I can possibly say to an artist, but at the same time, there's you know what I really like? I really like trailers, like not video trailers, but like I don't know if you saw it recently, but Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker, they have that pulp book that's coming out, and they created a 4-page trailer that's just in comic form that explains the gist of their comic in a very stylish and very Sean Phillips and Ed Brubaker sort of way. And it gets the point across. It has the cover with it. It's 4 images. And so you can share it on Twitter in totality. You can share it on Instagram. And like, I kind of feel like creating something like that works better than preview pages, because preview pages, if you just jump into a cross section of really any comic, it might be kind of confounding. But if you have this thing that kind of explains the vibe and the feel of Adventureman, which I'm going to say I've read the first issue. It's got its own vibe. That is for sure. I mean, like, I feel like that type of stuff works. But, but that might just be me.
No, it definitely does. I remember sometime early in the decade, people started doing, little GIF trailers of their comics. Companies would start doing that, and those were great. And then, people are still do that occasionally, where they'll actually will do little videos of the comic coming out, and basically what you're saying, but just done using the video process. But that's actually a good idea, is to actually do a specific 3 or 4 pages that really show what the book is and explain the book. So I will bear that in mind in a couple of weeks there. Because that's. I mean, I know like Adventureman itself is explaining it. I mean, once people read the book, the light bulbs will go off. But explaining it big picture is hard. I think it's really a book that, like most books, once you read it, it's like, oh, this what this book is. It's kind of hard to get that into a sentence or two.
Yeah. Well, let's jump into Adventureman now, because it is your next big project. It's coming on April 29th. You're working with your wife, Rachel Dodson and Matt Fraction, who you worked with on Uncanny X-Men before, I know.
Right.
As you mentioned, it has been in the works for quite some time. The first time I saw it mentioned was actually late 2017, and you said you were working on it in 2016, and it makes sense. I mean, like, the first issue is 64 pages. I'm going to read at least part of the solicit for the first issue, because it is like straight up one of the most bonkers solicits I've ever read in my entire life.
Good.
Lots of all caps, lots of exclamation points. I imagine Matt wrote this just because it has a very Matt-like feel, but
oh yeah,
he did.
And you know what's hilarious is I pulled that up to read in case you needed a description of the book. Like, oh, this really kind of nails it down. So yeah.
Okay, I'm going to try to be dramatic about it. A cataclysmic adventure decades in the making. In this wildly affordable triple-length first issue, revisit how the legend of the greatest pulp hero of them all, Adventureman, ended in a heartbreaking cliffhanger, with our hero facing execution at the vile hand of his ultra nemesis Baron Bazaar on the eve of, and I might fail at this, macabre apocalypse. Or did it? 80 years after his apparent demise, single mother Claire and her adventure fan son Tommy seem to be the only two people alive that remember the thrilling Adventureman sagas. But from that memory burns the spark of resurrection. Where his story ended, her story begins. This sense-obliterating, earth-shaking imagination quaking adventure that spans generations comes to you from Matt Fraction and Terry and Rachel Dodson. So that is quite the spiel, but at the same time, it's really fun. Like the first issue, it's like the first part you're reading, and it feels like you're reading like an old pulp news strip almost from like the 1940s or something like that. It's kind of got this different vibe to it. And then when you cut to the present and you're dealing with Claire and Tommy and the family, and sitting at this table and taking your her hearing aids out because she's just like, I'm over this nonsense. Like it goes from being a pulp story to being like a family story, but with like maybe the pulp stuff's gonna come back because of like their relation. The first issue was great. It was super wild, but this has such an interesting feel. I'm very curious about the origins of this. Like like I said, you and Matt had worked together on Uncanny. Right. You guys were both in Oregon. How did this project come together?
We were working on Uncanny, and we had a issue of Uncanny X-Men that took place in New York City, and I love drawing New York City. I love the city. I love architecture, especially. I always walk around with my head up, taking pictures the whole time I'm there. And I told him, I go, you can't write enough New York for me. I'm loving this issue of X-Men because they had moved the X-Men to San Francisco.
Yep.
In that run, and which was fine, but there's just nothing. I mean, San Francisco is a beautiful city, but there's just nothing that compares with New York as far as a visual background. And he goes, you like New York? He goes, I got an idea for you. And a week later, or a day later, I can't remember how quickly it was, he sent me this proposal for Adventureman. And this is, I'd say, 2010.
Wow.
Yeah, so I think it's maybe been post Uncanny, and then we went from Uncanny into the Defenders. Mm-hmm. I think it was right in that time period. And it was like, they had this this lady that basically takes over the helm of this Doc Savage-like character, and she becomes the modern version of him, and kind of, deals with what he was dealing with, but, from her perspective, which is, amazing because you're getting, there's all these stereotypes that you kind of know from adventure comics or adventure stories, and then we kind of just stick them on their head, flipping the scenarios around and the characters, and obviously it's way more than that. I think it's I told this to Matt. I go, it's really kind of like, it's like Hellboy meets Love and Rockets meets Tintin.
that is a hell of a meets.
It is. It's like it's in Hellboy. I always think of like Hellboy or like Indiana Jones. It's like kind of anything's possible. It's modern day or it's the real world as we know it, but that there's something else going on. There's more there. Ghosts are possible, and then the Love and Rockets was always the family / friend aspect that I always loved. I always thought was so cool that you could make a story that had people just, hanging out and talking and doing what, it's like kind of maybe like Seinfeld or something else where you can have normal people, but yet have this amazing story. And then Tintin is really, we're going for kind of a European flavor, and then the globetrotting nature of Tintin as well.
Yeah.
It covers a lot of bases, but we have a lot of stuff that we want to play around with, and it kind of allows us this amazing world to play in.
Yeah, I definitely see all those elements in it. It's kind of funny because as soon as you said Hellboy, my first response in my head was just like, really? And then I was thinking about it, and I was thinking about all these different parts in Hellboy where you're reading it, and it's like kind of everything. One thing I like about Hellboy is the fact that like no matter what they're doing, it's always kind of treated as ordinary to a certain degree,
right?
Even despite the fact it's like an extraordinary type thing. And I don't know, like I've haven't read beyond the first issue. I've seen the second and third issues, but it's like I could imagine Claire and Tommy getting into this situation, and like him being like Claire's like Kate Corrigan, where he's just like telling her like, no, that's not what Adventureman would do. This is what he would do. And right. I don't know. I love that idea of it. That's such a nice blend.
And actually I'm thinking one other thing that was a big impetus as Matt and I were developing this, maybe not for his initial proposal time, but over the years as we were getting closer and closer and starting to work on it actually, is that he realized he didn't have a book for his daughter. All the stuff he wrote was stuff that his I'm thinking 8-year-old daughter now, 9-year-old daughter, maybe 10-year-old daughter now. It's been a while. But all the stuff he wrote was stuff that was not for her. And this is the first book that he wrote with her in mind.
Mm-hmm.
And hilariously, I think about a year or two ago, she began referring to the book as Adventure Mom, which we don't know if that's exactly the right selling point with it, but that there is a lot of truth to that, because this is not a typical hero. I don't think it's not a typical hero story. It's not, I really think it's more of it's a family book with a lot of fun action, adventure, mysterious, stuff thrown in. So, how everyone reacts to that is the good part.
And now, a quick word from our sponsor. I want to take a quick second to give a shout out to my friends at TKO Studios. TKO is a new comics publisher doing things a little differently, with each of their titles being binge released in trade paperback and 6-issue collector's box sets at the same time. Their second wave of comics dropped recently, including one of my comics of the year in Jeff Lemire and Gabriel Hernandez Walta's Sentient, Roxane Gay and Ming Doyle's The Banks, and more, as well as gems from their first wave, like Garth Ennis and Steve Epting's remarkable war story, Sarah. Each is available now at tkopresents.com in trade, single-issue box sets, and digital release. Want to check these comics out before you order? Well, I have great news for you. If you visit tkopresents.com, you can read the first issues of each title for free right now. If you like what you read and you're a retailer, reach out directly to them at sales@tkopresents.com or go to tkopresents.com/vendors to order. TKO offers a 50% order discount as well as free shipping in the United States, a deal that's pretty hard to beat. Just a reader? That's cool too. You can order whichever comics you like directly off their site as well. Visit tkopresents.com to learn more today. And now, back to the show. Well, and I think that one thing that really kind of rings true, and especially in that first issue, is all of the things you said are true. Like, now that I think of it, it's totally, it's like an all ages book in its own way. But at the same time, it really feels very fine-tuned in a way that, like, only an idea 10 years in the making really could be towards both of your strengths.
Right.
Yeah, because like the cast, the characters really fit you. The intro is pretty wild, and it's got big Matt Fraction vibes. I'm just going to say that, which makes sense because you wrote it, but. I did want to ask, like, I find this really fascinating. You talked about all those different influences. I kind of came across a lot of different influences when I was researching for this. Like, you started drawing comics in college and you had said that figure drawing in real life was a really like big early influence, as well as fashion magazines, but also like 40s and 50s pinup art. But then like comic artist influences were people like Jim Lee, Mike Mignola, Adam Hughes, and beyond. And then like today, a lot of your you like the person was asking about your drawing of women, which I think is a thing that people know you for. And you said that one of your most impactful artistic influences today are almost entirely women artists.
Yeah, I know. That was me going through my Instagram feed. Like, holy cow. Most of my favorite people right now are female artists between 20 and 30. Yeah. It's like, and now some of those may have aged up even more, but I was really shocked to really start looking at that and going, people that are influencing you the most. And are these young females. And my guess on that is that I'm a huge fan of manga and of animation. And
common influences.
Yeah. And I think I could be, generalizing obviously, but I think a lot of those creators grew up on that same stuff. I just did it, 10 or 20 years before them. But maybe people that are my generation that are drawing comics were just focused on superhero stuff. I really wasn't. I mean, superheroes was just one of a bazillion things that I was into. And so I think that it's that manga and animation connection. I think that I see in their stuff, and that keeps me excited because you're dealing with so many genres and so many types of characters in those fields, in those works, as opposed to the stereotypes that you get that are pretty limited in superhero stuff over the last 60 years.
Yeah. Well, but I also feel like that whole stew of influences. I'm not saying that like every single one of them you can see on every single page, but it kind of feels like Adventureman is like a book very much that's tailor-made for you in terms of the things that interest you artistically and also in the world. I mean, you were talking about like you wanted to draw a book from New York. That was a huge start for this. And this is all of those things in one book, which I don't know. I mean, I have to imagine that makes it a particularly enjoyable experience.
It makes it a particularly enjoyable experience, and it makes it a particularly long process because there's so much stuff that I like, and I have so many influences, and I'm always finding new stuff. It is so editing my tastes and stuff down for this because I basically custom made this book. I didn't know that at the time, but I custom made it into a book that I could draw everything that I really like to draw that I wasn't getting paid to draw, and stuff I knew that other people liked, or at least I hope they like, because I love it. And there's just so many things that I wanted to play with, or I see something I go, God, it'd be really neat to do. And I was like, hey, I can kind of retro engineer that into my story and make it work in this other way, and pick beats from this thing or that thing and put it into there and all in a way that, you wouldn't think to do it.
Yeah.
So this project has been amazing that way that I continue. So I've worked on it for years. I keep finding new stuff and bringing that stuff in. So it's constantly, I think, improving and broadening, and the depth of the story. And when I mean the story, I mean the world, the characters, all that stuff. I think this project will be have the most depth of anything I've worked on, because I've just had the time to really put into it.
Yeah.
As opposed to worrying about drawing more windows in the background, maybe worry about, what colors might really affect this, and what, design on this certain thing will really make this work, as opposed to just simply putting more lead on the page.
Yeah. I actually feel too, I think all comic fans create their own like fan theories. And a lot of times that's about like, I don't know, why is Jean Grey wearing that dress in like the X-Men comics or something like that. But,
right.
When I look at the first pages early on where Adventureman is, hanging out with his gang, and there's like people like the Gentleman and like the Phaedra Phantom and like Sahib and Brawler of the Bowery and all these different characters. I just had this, I don't know, I had this feeling that you guys are having a lot of fun. That's what I really love feeling that when I'm reading a comic, because there's like a real infectiousness to it. It's when you read something that you feel like, wow, this person is really digging on what they're doing. I feel like it translates to the page. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, I in my career, I can 100% trace the best quality of the work I do to the enthusiasm I have for what I'm doing. And I've always, within reason, tried to pick the most fun project to work on for me, which sounds obvious and everything, but
it doesn't always play out that way.
Yeah, it doesn't always play out. And a lot of times things that you do say yes to that you think will be that thing are not that thing once you start working on it. But in general, that my career has gone along that path, that I've picked the stuff that I'm most excited to work on, which again seems like the obvious thing to do. But I think having, keeping expanding my tastes out to different things enables that to continually to happen. If I keep discovering new stuff and get excited about new stuff, I should keep finding new projects that excite me to work on. I mean, that's the idea. Stay excited so I can continue to do my best work and someday do that work that I'm actually think is as good as I want it to be.
Yeah. Well, I think it's really interesting, like looking at your career, and it seems, I don't know, there's like two. I don't. It's not really fair to say two flavors, because they're two halves of the same whole. But as an outsider, it feels like you particularly enjoy drawing Marvel stuff. But then also, like when you look at something like Red One, which you did for Glenah and Image that you mentioned earlier, it feels like with projects like that, that's really you putting yourself into it in maybe a way you wouldn't be able to on something like, I don't know, your first issue. One of my favorite parts, you guys did this quick draw interview with Marvel, which I thought was great. It's one of my favorite quick draw videos. I love those videos in general. But you mentioned that your first comic was like Excalibur number 83, I think it was. or first Marvel comic. And,
Right.
and you mentioned about how like that still was like one of your favorite comics you've ever drawn. And I don't know. I mean, it seems like there's like two halves of you to a certain degree. The part that's really genuinely enjoys drawing superhero stuff, but you also like stretching your legs in a real way. And something like Red One or Adventure Man gives you that opportunity.
Yeah, exactly. No, it's I what I try to think about is no matter what that at this point, because I've relaunched every book, or I've worked on every character. It's like you can't just offer me Spider-Man and go, and number one, go, hey, we're relaunching Spider-Man again. It's like it's not that excites me. It's what's going to happen in that storyline. And if it ends up being in Spider-Man, or if it ends up being in a creator-owned book, or it's that challenge of something new.
Mm-hmm.
And I get that same feeling on no matter what I'm working on, but with the creator-owned stuff, there is an understanding, I think, from the outset that you will have the time to do the quality of job that you want to do, and the opportunity to create as much as you want, and not get kind of compromised on the schedule, or the project takes a really goofy turn that you didn't expect, and you don't have no enthusiasm for that kind of thing. Whereas with the creator-owned stuff, you kind of know that you're in charge, and I think you just you help it grow,
Mm-hmm.
like an organic creature, and you just keep your enthusiasm helps it grow and grow. And I think so far, I mean, it's my third creator-owned book that has happened with. So it's I just think that organic analogy is a really good one. It's a creature. You keep feeding it, and it grows and grows and grows.
Do you enjoy like the building aspect of creator owned?
Yeah, I love creating. That's I think my favorite part of the job. That's why I think I've drawn comics this entire time instead of not going somewhere else. Is I'm given freedom to create, even if it's for the X-Men book, or for a Wonder Woman book, or for whatever. It's the freedom to create the best thing I can.
Sure.
I love that challenge a lot of times on a book like the current X-Men FF book, where a lot of stuff's already set in stone, but it's like, where can I go in there and improve little things, at least to my eye? And it's those little challenges, or telling a scene, or maybe I don't think enough with the character's acting or whatever, and really pushing, a character's actions or expressions or hairstyle or whatever, or the way you light it. All these subtle things I work on that keep me excited, where it's a little more limited range of things I can do on a mini series like that.
Mm-hmm. I'm curious. When I had Elsa Charretier on my podcast recently, and she was talking about how when she's doing November with Matt, that one of the things that at first that kind of got her was that she had to use this 12-panel grid, and it was a format she wasn't used to for a page. And at first, like it was like very rigid, and she wasn't sure about it. But then she realized that there was a lot of freedom even within that format.
Mm-hmm.
And I know that, I mean, Matt is he's got a lot of ideas, and
right.
I'm curious, like with Adventure Man, because it does feel like a big bombastic adventure book in a way that, like, I don't know, I guess you could say Casanova is in its own way, but its particular brand of insanity kind of takes it away from where Adventure Man is to a certain degree. Do you have a lot of freedom to find your own answers with this book?
Yeah, it's Matt and I. Let me see. On Uncanny, we worked full script, but on Defenders, we talked about the book a lot before we started on it, and I think I mentioned that I'd like to work plot, just because I'd like to have the opportunity to play a little bit more.
Yeah.
When I came into this comics, most of the stuff I was getting was plot, and I'm just in general more comfortable that way. I mean, I can work on it any way you send me. Give me a script or a plot. I can make it work.
So do you mean like Marvel style?
Yeah. And so he kept the Defenders book, basically page to page descriptions. And then with Adventure Man, I kind of said, let's not worry about page count. I always, in my mind, the 22 page thing is great for the industry, but as a creator, I think, you give me a story, and if it takes 10 pages to tell it or 32 pages to tell it, that's what you should do. Don't worry about limiting it to where it has to go. And I have always wanted the chances to expand, let things breathe. So Adventure Man was the book where he gave me a pretty much open end to kind of go as far as I wanted to go with that. And that's why the first issue is 64 pages.
I was going to ask. I'm like, then when he saw 64, he's like, I've made a huge mistake.
Yeah. Well, he sent me the initial plot. The first issue was 21 pages as he laid it out, and as a plot. And when I got through with that, it was 32 pages. Just because I think even if you read it, it doesn't feel like there's a lot of empty space in those first 32 pages. But I just felt like there were so many things that he just had as a description. I felt, well, really, to make this work, you have this as 1 or 2 panels, but I don't think it makes any sense unless it's 2 pages. That's just because, again, we're establishing a world there, and I felt like there's just things that needed to be clarified. And so, I added like a third more page to that first 32 pages, which is the 1940s era of the story. And but that's plot, and then Matt writes minimal description or minimal dialogue on those. If he knows exactly what he wants to have happen, he'll have it on there. But in general, it's pretty open to interpretation.
Yeah. Did you guys ever? You mentioned earlier about how many comics there are out there. Did you guys ever discuss making this? I mean, with a 64-page first issue, you're already like 3/5 of the way there for like a graphic novel. Did you ever consider making this, a graphic novel series? Especially considering the fact, I feel like your style and your experience with like making like Red One what is it, Veuve Rogue in France? Like, I feel like you already have kind of a European friendly style, and like the graphic novel format translates nicely to the album format. Did you guys ever discuss that?
Well, actually, I mean, this is, I think I kind of see this as a series of albums, really. I mean, the 64-page first issue kind of throws a lot of the plan out the window, because we needed X amount of story to tell our first arc or whatever, but it would have been a lot more helpful if that first arc would have been like 120 pages or so, but now it's like close to 150, which makes it a really big series of books. And so I think what we decided is to do each year is to collect everything into one big book, which will be album sized approximately. It might be slightly smaller. We're still working on that just to make it appealing to U.S. Booksellers. But it's definitely going to be oversized and hardcover. And you can read the book as a monthly comic, or you can read it as that European sized collection. And it's basically will be a whole story. I think we're looking at 168 pages for the first collection. So to answer your question, I think yes, or we're doing both. It's for those who want to read it as a monthly book. It's made for that. Then we also knew long term we're collecting it as a European kind of graphic novel, and that's how we've sold it to the European publishers. They'll publish them as European graphic novels, basically. That once a year, they're one big book. They like that idea. They have Glénat, who will most likely, in theory, be our publisher in France, has a really popular book that they're doing that's 144 pages each year. And so they really like the idea of having Adventure Man be collected that way, which got me thinking that may be the way to go also. So
I feel like that's kind of a modern variant of the Hellboy model that Mike Mignola uses. That's one thing I always really liked about the Hellboy and like the early BPRD stuff, is the fact that you would have these like kind of mini series, like the years, if you will, and then it would be collected into like a trade paperback. And to me, like that kind of model makes it very easy to come in on no matter what. Like the first story in the Mignola verse I ever read was BPRD, I think Darkness Calls, or no, it was Garden of Evil. And it was like, later I found out it was like the 7th volume or something like that.
Right.
But I was still able to jump in midway through without knowing anything about it. And like, there was something very nice about that. I don't know, like the combination of that and what you were saying about how, if it doesn't have to, if the book demands 32 pages or 64 pages, that's what you guys are going to do.
Right.
I talked to Jonathan Hickman about that, and he said something along the lines of, about how the 22-page comic, the standard format, creates cadences that makes reading to a certain degree like predictable. It's like when these hammers are going to hit, and when these moments are going to be playing out. And I like stories that kind of mess with that cadence. And I can tell you that 64-page first issue messed with my cadence in a very good way.
yeah. It messed with our cadence for about 3 years. Why are we launching the 64-page issue? It doesn't make any sense. That's fine. It needed to, that's the story. It's the only way you would know what you wouldn't want to come back for number 2 if you hadn't read those 64 pages. But it's funny, the Hellboy model. I mean, the Hellboy model. Like when I tell people about this, I generally say it's like Hellboy happened, where you get that miniseries every year. That was a complete story, but then it built into the next story. I mean, we have our first year of Adventureman has an enormous cliffhanger, but it also feels like you're getting a pretty good story over that year too. That's pretty gripping, and I think pretty readable story.
Yeah. Well, I want to jump over to X-Men and Fantastic Four, and one thing that I came across a quote that I thought was really fascinating, and maybe it speaks to why this project was so appealing to you. You said, I've thought this many times now while drawing this book. This book feels like the very first time I have drawn a, air quotes, Marvel comic book story. This story feels like the kind of stories I remember reading from Marvel growing up, a very Marvel superhero story. It's your book with Chip and Chip Zdarsky, and it's a great book, but I am very curious, like, why is this book the one that feels like a very Marvel superhero story to you?
It's, I don't know. I have a smile on my face as I draw each page. It's like, the superheroes are doing this thing and they're doing that thing, and there's family involved. And it just reminds me, it doesn't feel like a book from the 80s or the 90s. It feels like a book from today, but it just feels like a superhero story in the best sense. People run around in superhero clothes, but then there's the family stuff, and then there's this thing's happening, and then all of a sudden the X-Men and the FF are together, and I don't know. It's just I've never drawn a book that was so superhero-y. But I keep saying this in the best sense of the word, because there's a lot of times I can imagine books of superheroes sitting around tables talking. Yeah. Which, I have no interest in drawing. It just seems like that's an excuse for a writer to fill up word balloons or something, which I don't think this book is at all. This book's really, moves forward pretty quick and jumps around quite a bit. And I think that's kind of the superhero-y, fun Marvel, aspect. It feels like my memory of what books were like when I was a kid. Yeah. I don't know, just moving forward, I guess. Yeah, I mean, totally. Honestly, it like, when I look at it, you mentioned 80s. It kind of reminds me of when I was a kid. I would get these like grab bags of comics, and like the trick that they would always pull on you is they would put like a cool X-Men comic on the outside on both sides, and then inside would it just be like 5 issues of the NAM. And no, that's no slander to the NAM or to like ROM Space Knight or anything like that, but I was there for the X-Men, and like, so I'd get like comics that were like Power Pack crossing over with somebody. And in a lot of ways, they kind of, the book reminds me of that, whereas there's always like this central idea, and then it's just go from there. But very much modernized in the sense that, like, I don't know, this was like an event that was basically telegraphed in House of X #1, where Cyclops talks to Franklin Richards, and he's like, tell your son he can come over anytime. His other family's waiting. And like, so it's just all happening. The thing I am really curious about, though, is you already have Adventureman. Right. You're trying to kill yourself, Terry? What's going on? How did this project come together? Because it's, you certainly were not lacking in work. Right. I've known for like maybe a year or so now that once I finished drawing Adventure Man, there was going to be a huge gap between me finished drawing the book and when the book came out. And as it turns out, I think it's going to be 7 months or something, what that gap is. And
Oh.
that 7 months is like time to do something else.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew I wanted to work on something fun, something, not another creator-owned book, I guess. And maybe that's not the best way to describe it, but not something that was so all-consuming as a creator-owned book, something where I could just tell a story without having to create a world.
Sure.
And even turning off my brain isn't the right thing because my storytelling is at a level where I'm always trying to solve these problems, and so I never can just turn that off. But it feels good to just have a world that's already basically set up, and I can just come in and tell the story. I think, and with characters that I really enjoy, and it helps that this book was numerous factors all colliding at once that just I couldn't say no to.
Mm-hmm.
Working with Chip. Drawing the X-Men again, but drawing the FF for the first time, really, apart from covers. I mean, FF was my favorite comic over long form as a kid. John Byrne did a really long run on it, and that was like when I first started buying comics and collecting comics. That was the first book that I really enjoyed month to month for a long time because it was such a wide-ranging story. It was so galactic and family and so many characters in the Marvel universe that I got to learn about, and so the chance for myself to draw these characters over 4 issues was I really couldn't say no to. I'd actually been offered the FF a couple times as a book, and it just never seemed right at the time, or just didn't schedule out right. And so this is a way to kind of take my checklist and cross these guys off that I was able to finally do it on a story that mattered.
Mm-hmm.
Not just an annual or something like that, but a story that needs to be told. And I love the House of X story. So having it tie into that as an X-Men fan, because at heart I was really a huge X-Men fan. So it just ticked all these boxes for me. And the schedule is good.
Yes,
the timing was good. Yeah.
It did seem, looking at your career, it's interesting because it seems like, in a weird way, the X Office somehow, no matter how it changes, because like when you first worked there, I think it was like Excalibur and it was Storm, and I imagine it was Bob Harris that was running it at that time. And then like you did stuff during like Nick Lowe, and I think Andy Schmidt might have been there when you were there. Like during that span, and now you're working with Jordan White and like with Jonathan Hickman, kind of being the I don't want to say showrunner because I know he hates that term, but like, the grand poobah in some ways. And it seems like no matter who's running the ship, it seems like it's like, it's not the North Star in the sense that it's your mutant, but it's kind of your Marvel North Star no matter what. You just kind of always end up back there. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, I do too. But I think that the X-Men made such an impression on me. And the funny thing is that when I was like breaking in, that was like the Jim Lee X-Men stuff was like at its zenith, and I was breaking in at that time. And so I think there's this correlation in my mind between breaking in and having that stuff be so big at the time that it always feels like it's something that I really identified with. Though, my favorite like X-Men stuff was always the annuals that Art Adams drew.
Mm.
Like once a year, there's just be 64 pages of just stunning artwork, these hilarious stories, wide-ranging stories, fun stuff. And it was like every year I looked forward to that new Art Adams X-Man or New Mutants or whatever annual that he would do. And that just made a huge impression on me. And obviously the X-Men are, in a weird way, kind of like the most realistic or most human characters of Marvel because they're the persecuted ones. There's such a real world quality to them. And then I use family a lot, but there's what a great family of characters it is. And I think there's still a wide range of characters that I can kind of put a stamp on a few of them and feel like they're my own while I'm working on them.
Yeah.
And, I think even though they age and they change slightly, I still feel like I understand them because I've known them for so long. And it's fun. I actually embrace the changes when someone does something kind of a little bit different. It's like, oh, what? That's really cool. I know who this person is, and they've moved into this phase. So yeah, I think it's because it's the widely diverse range of characters and the family nature, and that just it feels like it's something easy to hop onto.
Yeah, I also feel like the family part is even particularly more fitting to 2020, given the fact that it's not like the family you're born to, it's the family you choose in some ways. And that's a very like fitting sentiment. I also like, I don't know. I don't know if there's a real sense, you know, when you read about the writer's room for all these X-Men books, and you read about the fact that like they're working really cohesively and they have this like Slack channel that they're all talking in and everything like that. It does feel like in some ways this is an X-Men renaissance in a lot of ways, and that there's a real genuine creative enthusiasm to being involved with this. Is that something you really feel with projects when everything lines up?
Yeah, exactly. No, it all comes down to enthusiasm, because drawing comics is a thankless, lonely job in reality. You know, I am at home so many hours of the day, at night, working on this stuff, you know, alone. I mean, Rachel works with me most of the time, but we're still in our own world doing that. And, you know, if you're not enthusiastic about what you're doing, I don't know what's going to motivate you to do great work if that's not the case. And, you know, if you're not doing, in my case, in my career, it's doing quality work is what it's all about. Doing stuff that I'm excited about, and enthusiasm makes it a lot more easy to be excited and do your best work. Yeah. And it shows in the work. It shows in Rachel's work. When I do a good job, when I'm excited about something, Rachel's excited to ink it.
Yeah.
And then the writer feels that, the colorist feels that. You know, if I'm not feeling it, it really it shows. I mean, I'm a professional now. I've worked so long that I can make the pages professional, but being excited really helps. I remember I worked on a Star Wars book, which, you know, Star Wars is my totem, is my go-to. That's what got me into drawing and reading comics, with Star Wars. And I got to work on the Star Wars miniseries with Dark Horse in the 90s. And it was right when they started doing the re-releases. And so there was this moment in time where Star Wars was a big part of the culture again. And the fact that I was working on the book at the exact same time just totally fueled. I mean, I was already excited about it, but then having all these books and movies and toys and all this stuff coming out, and everybody wanted to know about Star Wars at the same time, really helped. And I feel like that's kind of the same thing with the X-Men book now. That there's this huge, at least in the comics anyway, it's this huge cultural, you know, awareness of what's going on with the X books.
Yeah. So does Rachel? You said that she notices. Does she like see a page and she like can tell a difference?
Yeah. Rachel's my best editor.
Yeah. I don't know. That's interesting. Like, I wonder, has she ever been like, I don't know about this one. I don't know.
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Almost on a daily basis. And that, I'm not saying the page and whole, but there might be a drawing on there, or a hand, or an eyeball, or a finger, you know, a background. It's great. It's frustrating, but it's nice having that in-house art editor, there that keeps me honest. Because a lot of times I get enthusiastic and I don't see, you know, the forest for the trees, you know, and she has to ink the trees.
Yeah.
You know, I create the forest, but she has to ink the trees, and then sometimes some of the trees are missing or right in the wrong place, or, you know, and that her job is to notice those things. So she's very detail oriented and specific oriented, which, you know, as an inker, that's a great skill to have. So, yeah, I know she keeps me honest.
That's, I mentioned the quick draw video earlier, and I'll make sure to link to it on this, but I really love that video because being able to see how the two of you work. Right. And I actually, you know, that I find it really fascinating because, you know, you talk to a lot of artists, and right, it used to be like when you were coming up, it was like, you know, pencilers had inkers. And
right.
And that is something that has shifted away over the years. It's like you look at like somebody named like Chris Somney. I mentioned him earlier. Chris Somney is somebody who his art really doesn't take form until he's inking.
Right, exactly.
And it's interesting because you two have a pretty interesting split. I think that Ro Stein and Ted Brandt do this on Crowded as well. But I think with your guys' stuff, you pencil, she inks, and then on Adventureman, you're coloring too, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
So you've been working together for a long time. I tried to figure out exactly when it started, and near as I could tell based off of Wikipedia, it was that Spider-Man and Black Cat book, but it might have been before then.
Yeah. So I started working in early '93. Rachel started working with me. I mean, I brought her in as helped her get work as an assistant for Gary Martin, and she got better and better. And I kept sending pages out to people. I kept sending pages to New York or wherever, and having someone ink the book. I never really hit it off or was able to make it work with another inker for this first few years of my work. And then Rachel's stuff got good enough that I was offered Generation X in late '96, and Rachel had just inked me on a X-Man graphic novel thing, and she did an amazing job. And this Generation X thing came up, which was going to be, regular work for a couple of years. It's something I really wanted to do. I knew it needed to look good in an X-Men book, a monthly book. And I mentioned it to Mark Powers, and he's like, yeah, sure, whatever. I don't think he cared. And boom, it just totally made both of our careers, I think, because having someone I could trust implicitly inking my work meant that each page that I do, each drawing that I do, seeing how it turned out, how I was getting ink, meant that I could even put more work into the page, and it looked, everything I put down looked good, and so I would put down more work and I'd work harder and harder on each page, which made me a better artist. Each page went by, I became a better artist. She became a better inker. But my confidence in my own work grew so much having someone working so closely with me inking the book, and me not having to worry at all whether what I was putting down would be translated how I wanted. There were no issues. We both have very similar tastes and interests in artwork that we just don't have a problem. I mean, I think we become something better. Obviously, the two combined.
You guys are, it's a phrase I've used before, but you're a comics Voltron. You form into one giant robot together. But
right.
But
yeah.
I do think, looking at your pencils in that quick draw video, that's one of the things I think is interesting is, and I don't know if this changes depending on the project, because you showed me a page from X-Men Fantastic Four too, and it seems like you're not Jeff Darrow levels of robust with your pencils, but you're certainly pretty. You put it down. You make sure to you're not roughing it out or something like that. So it seems like, I don't know. I'd be fascinated to see how your pages would change if you tried to ink yourself versus Rachel. It probably, in a weird way, after working together for so long, Rachel's stuff would probably look more like you wanted it than yours would.
Right. Yeah. It's a really weird thing because, I don't know, for over a decade and a half now, my convention sketches, I've been inking myself.
Mm.
And so it's this thing where it really made me a better artist, because what I do essentially is a super quick rough. And then I basically go straight to inks. I basically am inking as I draw, which is essentially, as an artist, is what you're supposed to do. I mean, that's most not traditional, but most artists nowadays, or forever, when they draw something, it's a fairly rough drawing, and then they go do all the drawing in the ink stage, because you can see the blacks, you can make the precise lines, and so I've essentially taught myself to do that.
Mm-hmm.
So then, which makes it really weird when I come back to drawing tight pages for somebody else.
Mm.
It's almost counterintuitive to me, and it's a battle that I kind of fight it daily. Where I wanted to leave something really rough because I completely understand what's there.
Right.
And it's solid, but Rachel's used to inking a certain level of what we call tightness. What you're saying about the way my pencils look, we call that tight. And when someone's super clean, it's all, you basically can print from it. That's super tight pencils. That's how, at least how we used to refer to it, was tightness.
Mm-hmm.
See, that guy's stuff is tight. So you really honestly could print from the pencils.
Yeah.
And that's how I came into comics. That's why I did come into comics, because not knowing who was inking you had to have it. You know, in my mind, the way to succeed was that there was no doubt what I wanted the art to look like. I knew what I wanted to look like, and by penciling extremely tight, um, that was my vision. Even if the worst inker was inking it, it'd still be in the ballpark of what I wanted. And then that carried through with Rachel, because Rachel could nail what I put down, and even and add to it. So it made my stuff more. It took it to the next level of what it was supposed to be.
Yeah,
more Terry than Terry was, which was that's how a team works together, and they improve upon each other, make it more than what it would be without the other.
Yeah, yeah. I did want to actually ask about Chip too, because I find, like the interesting thing, I find it really funny. You're working with Matt and you're working with Chip simultaneously, and I feel like those two guys are just like, because of Sex Criminals and because of their relationship, they feel like permanently attached in a way. But it's interesting. Chip is such a good writer, and it really feels like he kind of fits your exact mentality in terms of art in a very exact way. He's so good at character, and he's so good at like making like knowing the right rhythms between balancing action and conversation, and making sure that like the story never drags. And I find that fascinating, because like one thing that I think that is an underrated part about your art is, obviously you draw very pretty people, but at the same time, you are an excellent character artist. You bring people to life in a very, real way. And like that combination with Chip is just really perfect. So how has it been working with Chip? You said that was an appeal for you. So has it worked out?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, definitely. When I said there was a bunch of things that lined up on this project, really, my background is much more scientific. I have a very scientific, mathematical mind. And so I can actually think about a lot of things at once and think about a lot of factors on things. So when I make a decision, it's not just purely art based.
Sure.
It's business, it's emotion, there's just a lot of things I think of. And, choosing this project, the X-Men FF book, was a lot of things lining up. The fact that Chip was a great writer, the fact that the story is what it was, the fact that Chip worked with Matt, the fact that I was working with Matt, the fact that I'd be promoting this book, fairly simultaneously with Matt, and then Chip and Matt's return of Sex Criminals. And those are all just things that weighed on my mind and said, beyond the fact that this sounds like an amazing story, which is the most important thing, there's all these side factors that just make it this a yes project. And then the outline that Chip had given me a couple months before I'd actually decided officially to do the story was like, oh, this is great. This is a chance to play with this stuff and this stuff. And the gist of the story is this. And I know that I can, have all these things happen in the story that make it exciting for me to draw. Not knowing the actual details of some of the stuff, but knowing that what I'd known of Chip, that he would deliver on the character and on the story, that he would give me the right things to draw.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. It was trusting him. And I went back. I usually don't talk to a mainstream book writer, like a Marvel writer, this many times before I say yes to a book, especially if I don't know him that well. And I asked Chip a number of questions, like up till like the day that I said yes to the book. Cause I was like, no, because I had a pretty good gut feeling of what the book was. And I just kept going to him and going, I think this is going to happen, right? This is this and this. And he's like, yes. And I was like, okay, I have all the faith in you now. This is what we think it is. So
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the last question I have is a bit of a sprawling one. I find you said that you've been working in comics for 27 years now, and you came in at a very interesting time. Like I read a quote from you where you actually said, fortunately, when I broke in 1993, they were handing out jobs to anybody with a pulse.
Yes.
And 1993 in comics was a wild time. That was like kind of the explosion just like 3 years later where everything kind of fell apart. Right. And then the funny thing is I read another interview with you in like, I was trying to figure out when it was around Harley Quinn, and you were talking about how it kind of seemed like, comics were really in an uncertain place at that point. And you were just like, I don't know how the direct market could sustain because like all this different stuff. And it's been interesting because you've ridden out. You went through a boom and you went through a bust and then you went through a boom and now here we are.
Right.
And you kind of rolled through it and you found all these different ways to make it work. As somebody who's been doing this for a long time, like how do you feel about comics now? And obviously there's world factors right now, like the coronavirus stuff is going to affect everything. But do you feel like comics are in a good place, even if it's a much different place than where you first came into?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing place because there is such a selection of stories to read. I mean, that was always when I was really getting into comics early. As a teenager, early teenager, it was the mid '80s, and that's when the direct market was selling black and white books, and Dark Horse was about ready to start. European books were being imported through heavy metal, and Marvel had its Epic line. So when I was growing up reading comics, there was an amazing array of stuff, beautiful stuff. I mean, there was so many great things to choose from, and I had it. That's just what I thought was normal. Going to a comic shop, like in '86 or '87, and there was just all these great books to choose from. Dave Stevens was doing The Rocketeer. I was able to read all this Mobius stuff. Dark Horse was publishing European books. Dark Horse is a big thing. Dark Horse being an Oregon company. This is a real side note, but being an Oregon company, I've seen all these guys living where I live, doing comics, had their own company, and a lot of that stuff was created around. And I was so excited about that, and that really set me on the path that I'm on, where knowing that I could work for Marvel and DC, but then work for myself as well. I think I'm where I'm at because of that. I've seen that early on, and so
like the Legend line in particular, or earlier than that. Like that was like Mignola and Art Adams.
That really helped, and that's like when that came out. It's about almost when I started working, so that really kind of inspired me. But this is even Dark Horse Presents and Concrete, and this stuff. Black Cross, which Chris Warner drew. There was just, I think in between that time, then like the Sin City stuff was starting to happen, and there was just this possibility that that as an artist, writer, or creator, you could do anything you wanted to do. And I think that's the time that we've returned to now. There was a big gap there where it was really just mainstream stuff or superhero stuff, and now we're in a time where if you have a great idea for a story, not for a type of story, but for a story, it's possible, and you can build a fan base that can sustain you. And that's the work using social media, the internet connecting us globally like that has made a huge impact on everybody. But in comics, it's connected people from all over the world who have a love of something, or you can have fans all over the world.
Yeah. I mean, and with crowdfunding and everything too, it's made it possible to, I mean, I'm not saying everyone's getting rich or anything like that, but there's like an increase in the floor, and there's also an increase in the ceiling and the potential for creators. And I think that is really, it's a great thing for comics, because everyone wants to make great art and everyone wants to tell their stories, but like the fact that you can combine, like, you look at like somebody like Hannah Blumenreich, who did Spidey Zine on Twitter, and then she did a story for, I believe it was Amazing Spider-Man 25, one of the Amazing Spider-Man 25s, right? And then she turned that into she had a big social media following at that point, and then she did Full Court Crush, which she self-published on Gumroad. And if I remember correctly, she said online that she had made as much money off of that as she was off of, or more than that, off of than she made off of her Marvel work. And she also won like an Ignatz for that. And it's you can do so much with your work in so many different ways, and it can translate into so many different types of comics that makes it, I don't know. I find it really exciting, even though there are like scary parts about it too.
Right. Yeah. It's if you have a desire to do something of quality and enduring and something that you want people to be excited about, the opportunity is there to do it and to have an audience to read it. And that it just makes for a really healthy genre, or makes comics extremely healthy.
Yeah.
Because there's it will just keep growing, and how it grows and how things will, there are going to be changes, I think, and can't predict what those will be and how it will change. But just for a while, there's going to be a lot of really good comics coming out, because the opportunity is there and people have the ideas and the technology is there to enable it to get to everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I'm excited for everyone to be able to read your comics, which are coming out currently and will be coming out April 29th. You have X-Men Fantastic Four and you have Adventureman. Terry, that's all I have for you. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk about those books, all your other comics, and everything else. I appreciate you taking the time.
Oh, you bet. Thanks, David. It's been a pleasure. Really good talking to you. As you know, I'm a big fan of the show. So this almost every week I enjoy having this listened to when I'm doing something mindless.
Now you have to listen to yourself. I'm sorry.
And I'll be skipping this episode.
Okay, that's fair. That's fair. Before we go, I want to give a quick shout out to a very special patron, Sean Kirkham, with another edition of Off Panel's Beasts of the Week. This segment is built to highlight someone or something in comics I'm impressed by recently, earning them the position as the podcast Beast of the Week. This week, it's more Beasts of the Week, as I'm giving it to two people and a larger group. First, major shouts to Jen Vaughn and Jaslyn Stone for hosting the Very Very Shopping Network over the weekend to help out those impacted by Emerald City Comic Con's postponement. Creators are in need, and those two stepped up so they can make up for all the losses from not having Comic-Con over the weekend. Also, shouts to all the comic retailers who are figuring out how to sell comics in a time of crisis. It's a tough time for everyone, and to see shops like Big Bang Comics, Books with Pictures, The Beguiling, and beyond who are coming up with the outside-the-box solutions, that's awesome. I salute you guys. So big ups to Vaughn, Stone, and the comic retailers of the world. You're all my Beasts of the Week. Thanks for listening to this week's episode of Off Panel with artist Terry Dodson. You can find Terry on Twitter at Terry Dodson Art, on his website at terrydodsonart.com, and his work in the currently being published X-Men Fantastic Four and in the upcoming Adventureman #1 at Image Comics on April 29th. As a heads up, Off Panel is once again brought to you by Sketch.com. Check out the new version of the site and consider subscribing for access to all the site's content and its members only forum. If you're a fan of Off Panel, make sure to check it out on Patreon. If you back the show on there, you not only support it, but you get early access to each week's podcast, access to weekly content, and more. Also, don't forget to subscribe to Off Panel on iTunes or Spotify and give the show a rating or review while you're at it. You can find Off Panel and Sketched on social media by liking it on Facebook at /Sketched, that's SKTCHD. Follow on Twitter at SketchComic or following me at @SlicedFriedGold. Big thanks to all my existing patrons, including Charlie Chu, Greg Peterson, Stefan Hall, Dan Lee, Cameron Schrader, Pensacola Pop Comics, Kim Estlin, Philip Mera, Christian Shelton, Kenny Porter, Chris Pachalo, Torin Grombeck, Fuzz Bubbles, Christopher Todd, Transmitter Down, Harry Sayer, Waltz Comics and Books, Carl Mizell, Danny Ollie, Paul Slates, Litwin Studios, Akil Wilson, Nathan House, Alex Demetriopoulos, Terry Dodson, Troy Jeffrey Allen, Liana Kangas, Keegan Ray, Milton Lawson, Wesley Gift, Sean Kirkham, Harry Small, Alistair Ross, Julio Anta, Brett A. Schmidt, Jason Goodmanson, Paul Ranwan, Connor Farner, Vita Ayala, Aditya Bidikar, Tara Ferguson, Dave Slusher, WMQ Comics, Akil, Kokachi, Phil White, Sean Pinello, Ken Heidelman, Philip Seavey, Al Ewing, Ryan Alcock, Nick Michelin, David Kelly, Rob Wilson IV, Nick Polito, Owen McCready, Brendan Fletcher, Gary Maloney, Jonathan Nilsson, Matthew Groom, Jason Assey, Adam Bogart, Xavier Files, Matthew Taylor, Tyler Turner, Nick Patera, Jacob Sorelli, Ford Gilmore, David Braldy, Ira James Udaskin, Modern Magic Stories, Nick Hall, Bjorn Basin, John Hendricks, Steve Anderson, Ian Maxfield, Cliff Chang, Benjamin Shipper, Colin McMahon, Chris Palmer, Scott McGovern, Nathan Fairbairn, Kat McKenzie, Greg Rucka, Adam Highfield, Fiona Staples, Chris Hallren, Mark Abnett, Mike Murphy, Michael Shirley, Tom Barnett, Jim DiMonacos, Norbert Nicolo, James Kaplan, and Mission Comics and Art in San Francisco. You guys are all the best. A quick thanks to Upright T-Rex Music, who wrote and performed Off Panel's theme song just for the show. Check out their music on Spotify because it's completely delightful. Thanks for listening, and tune in next week for another episode.